Hello class and welcome to MSE 402, Engineering Project Management. What I want to do is I want to walk you through the week 4 video lecture, and the video lecture for this week is going to be on project execution. Executing a project, it's going to be that executing the project phase. So let's jump into our models once again this week so that we can get a chance to see what those look like. If you take a look at the model off to the side of me, you'll see that the executing process group is one of those ones that the PMBOK, the PM Body of Knowledge, Book of Knowledge, talks about coming in, and you can see where the slope starts on this. It's over in the initiating group. You're actually starting to do some level of execution, and it goes all the way over and it sweeps over into the closing of the project group. Executing the project is probably going to be one of the hardest things that happens for a project manager. So don't forget that you've got those 10 knowledge areas that in the model below the image that I've got that we talk about. And then what I want to do is I want to then go over to our big master model, the model that I created for you on what actually happens in a project. And you can see that the execution phase, the executing phase, is done at the point where we've kind of finished up a percentage of what you would think is the big part of the project, putting that schedule together. The WBS, getting the scope identified, actually getting that working schedule up, budgets put together, budgets laid out in the schedule. You actually have a baseline prior to executing. So right as soon as you start to execute, you're going to find that we're going to create that baseline. And during the execution phase, this is where we're going to start to draw down and try to get earned value. We're going to start to try to find out how effective and efficient we are and what that means as we move through the project. So that Microsoft project schedule becomes very important. It gives us the ability to calibrate and to measure exactly where we're at on a project. And there are different fidelities of Microsoft project schedules. There are other tools that are used also. So you can do poor man's earned value all the way up to these elaborate models of predicting exactly where you're going to be. What we're introducing you to in the Microsoft project version of it is something that I'll call middle of the road. As a program manager, you should be versed enough to be able to put together a project, Microsoft project schedule, and lay out a plan. You need to be able to do that because those are the skill sets that are going to be required for you. But you can see where we're going to be looking at those areas after what we've done in the planning phase. Now that planning phase, don't forget, it sweeps continually over us in all the phases. So we are continuing to plan, replan. That's part of what happens as a project manager. So let's take a look at that execution phase. You can see we're looking at creating earned value, looking at the cost baseline, where we're at. You're still controlling the project and communicating the project and monitoring it, even if you aren't in that actual phase that we're going to go into for those. Now, don't forget the two areas that I want you to remember. Changes are constantly coming into the side, and those changes are causing you to have to adapt, to change some level of flexibility into the plan, and then quality. Sometimes you have to dial quality up, sometimes you have to dial quality down. Sometimes you have to re-baseline based upon creating something from a quality perspective that is different from what you originally put together in the scope. So those are all normal activities that happen in the executing phase. So let's take a peek at when we talk about executing, what that means. And there's two key terms I keep talking to you about, and we've repeated over and over and over because this is the mantra for a project manager, is that you control the effectiveness and the efficiency of your project. And the difference between those two, what is the difference between efficient and effective? Okay? Effectiveness refers to how useful something actually is. Effective is that efficiency refers to how well you use something. Okay, so effective. How effective are we? How effective am I with putting our plan together and the people? It satisfies or exceeds all customer requirements. That's the big point that you need to remember. That's where you're shooting for. I meet or exceed my customers' expectations, because when I don't meet my customers' expectations, I cannot sell a project. The project is incomplete. You cannot close it. So you have to find a way to get to that point. Efficient meets all internal requirements for cost, margins, asset utilization, other efficiency measures. Efficiency refers to how well you do something by performing or functioning in the best possible manner with the least waste of time and effort. That's what you're looking for. Now, let's kind of pull at that a little bit more. Project efficiency. When we talk about project efficiency, because you've only got a limited number of things that you can tweak to make your project come in under schedule, under budget, without going to the other extreme where you're over schedule, over budget. Efficiency is one of those ways where you look at resources. How well do we use the resources we have in front of us? And then efficiency focuses on project processes. How well are we doing the right things the right way? Those are the two characteristics that as a program and project manager you're required to really focus on. These are the things that make a difference when it comes to the back end of the project when we start to try to close it. Especially, remember, we're in the phase now where what we're doing, we're running the project. This is what we're trying to do at this point, okay? So let's go ahead and take a look at how do we balance these? How do we figure out, what that looks like? So from an executing standpoint, what are the struggles? There are typically 5 reasons that a project struggles in execution. And I can tell you from many years of experience, all of these are things that run into us on a regular basis. There are things that you will run into. There are things that will continue for everyone. So these issues drive your project cost, schedule, and quality and resource effectiveness. The first one is undefined tasks and subtasks. Suddenly, we have to do something that we didn't know we had to do. That's out of scope. Not only is it out of scope, sometimes it means you have to go to a change board and you have to get approval to do that. And if that stops the project dead until you can get that approval, that is a potential. Other things are that you go ahead and you do it and you recognize that you're doing it. It's out of scope. It's out of budget, which means that I have to cover it somewhere out of program or project management reserve, which means that I may end up at the end of the project, if it hasn't been approved, doing an overrun based on trying to complete this. So those undefined tasks and subtasks, when you were doing the WBS, when you were putting the scope statement together, the clarity you created at that point and the detail that you created at that point is going to drive this ability. So the more detailed you are, the more you understand exactly what you're getting into from a work perspective as a program and project manager. That's exactly what you're looking for here. Okay, so that was number 1. Struggles number 2, scope changes, also known as scope creep. Official scope creep occurs when the project manager allows the project scope to extend beyond its original objectives. Your stakeholder, your customer, his goal is to get as much bang for his buck as possible from you. Your job is to make sure that you meet his expectations without going above that. That's the balance that we talk about. So as a project manager, you're constantly on a daily basis looking at how do I meet my customer or client's objectives but not overrun the expectations from my side as to what we were going to deliver to them. And it really does take a disciplined program manager and project manager to take a good, clean look at things. And sometimes what this means is you have to have that hard conversation with your customer and say, I know we talked about this, but this is not what my expectation was. We are not delivering you a Cadillac. We are delivering you a Volkswagen. That's what you bid. That's what you asked for. So that difference in scope, the fidelity of the pieces of the project become one of the areas that from a scope change standpoint really can come back to haunt you. Now, number 3, let's talk about poor communication. Project managers are responsible for trying to get the right people in the right place at the right time. And the only way to do that is to have effective communication and the skills to make sure that happens. Everyone should know what is expected of them. Everyone should know what the plan is for the day, not the schedule, what the plan is. And the plan has got offshoots in case something goes wrong. Project managers that just hand out a project schedule and say this is what we're working to are doing themselves an injustice. You need to have the ability to show exactly what the playing field is for you in any of the things that could happen to you on your project. So bad news travels fast, and I can tell you that good news is hard to get out to teams. Bad news travels at it's almost like the speed of sound and light. It's amazing. Okay, so the big thing to remember is that good project managers communicate everything all the time to everyone. They go out of their way to do that. And sometimes that means you need to over-communicate. You need to remember what over-communication is and when to use it, because sometimes a little over-communication at a certain point in a project will save you a ton of things that could go wrong. Everybody understands exactly what we're doing at the right time. Now, number 4, and we've never seen this before, impossible deadlines. I get told you're going to make this happen and this is the date it's going to happen on, and you look at it and say there's no way we can do that. You still have that deadline in your schedule. You still have it as a milestone. You're still expected to deliver it. Part of that communication we talked about in the previous slide is going to be from a status standpoint and letting people know we will not meet this deadline. If you know for sure we're not going to meet this deadline, you need to bite the bullet, tell people up front. Don't wait till the last minute until it's apparent to everyone that you're not going to make that deadline. You need to be accountable for what's happening, and one of those things is you need to challenge things that may be unrealistic or unachievable. And that is probably one of the biggest and hardest things for a project manager to do, is to stand up in front of an audience and say, no matter how hard we look, no matter how hard we work, no matter what we do, we are not going to meet this particular deadline. We're going to be here, not here. Project managers that are honest and do that up front are respected not only by their employees and the people that work with them, but by the people above them. So this is something that I tell you, you really need to focus on. Now, number 5, resource deprivation. There are so many times when you need the right person at the right place, and guess what? It doesn't happen. And you struggle. What you're doing is you're constantly trying to get the right people going to the right place. One of the models that is kind of used as a project management tool is it's kind of like trying to rake worms to get them to go into a specific direction. It's tough. It really is. Trying to get people doing the right thing at the right time is not easy. But that's one of the challenges of being a project manager, is that you are responsible for that. That's part of your, part of your skill set is the ability to do that. Getting those people at the right place at the right time. And sometimes when those resources aren't available, you have to be creative. You have to think, how do we find people that have got another skill set that can come in to do this? How can we move this around? If we look at our schedule, where are the areas that we may have a little slack? What could we do? So that planning activity associated with this becomes critical. The next piece is going to be project risk. And risk can be positive risk and negative risk. And you need to understand that. So there's 2 different sides to the risk coin. Most of the time when we think about project risk, we think about things that could go wrong and what would be the problem associated with that. We look at the negative ones, but you need to remember that there are proactive ones also that you can do. There are things you can look at and you can say, this is an opportunity for me. If we can do this at this point in time, we can either change the budget, we can increase schedule, we can deliver things early. There's a ton of things that can be done, but you need to understand what risks you have, which ones you accept, which ones you transfer to other people, which ones you're going to have to deal with, and then from the positive perspective, what can we take advantage of? So let's kind of blow into that and look at project risks. So risk associated to the PMBOK, so the PM, the Project Management Book of Knowledge. Risk is an uncertain event or condition that, if it occurs, has a positive or negative effect on the project's outcomes or objectives. A risk can be positive, meaning beneficial to the project, or it can be negative, meaning detrimental to the project. That's a great explanation. All of us really have a good flavor for that. We've always had things that happen to us that we understood could be a positive or a negative thing, depending on where we were at and what we were doing. But sometimes it's really difficult to visualize a positive risk, which may call an opportunity to improve the project, into a position where I just didn't see it happening. If we had known that we could buy Apple stock at a certain point in time, we could have made a fortune. Those are positive risks, things like that. Let's talk about what this really means when we get into working on a project. So it's possible that a positive risk would be capable of improving the project's quality and overall performance. You can deliver early, you can deliver under cost, under budget. There's a variety of things. You can use resources when you didn't think you need to use them. So let's talk about risk management also. We learned that projects contain not only good but bad risks, and we refer to these as positive and negative. Other ways to kind of look at that is, what is the risk and reward structure for what we're doing? That balancing act that we see in this illustration below my picture is something that happens with everything you are working on a project. Every activity, every task we're working on, there is always a potential for something to go wrong. Always. It doesn't matter what it is. And sometimes they are things that we would never have expected. So we have known knowns. Those are the risks that we know that are available with the type of technology we're dealing with. We have unknown unknowns, and those are things that come and go that we would have never ever anticipated they might happen to us. These could be things that are acts of God. These are things that could happen that are just so out of the norm that it would never ever have shown up on a risk management plan or been adapted into a risk matrix. But as a project manager, your goal is to talk to all of your people and ask them, what are the big risks? If you do that and you keep a risk plan in place, what you'll be able to do is at least mitigate the majority of what's going to happen to you that can be bad, because in the planning stages, you will have something that gives you the ability to execute a different way. So don't forget, project execution is what we're talking about and how important this risk management is. So risk management has stages. You have the methodology, you have the responsibilities and roles, you have the budget, and you have the schedule. You control all of these different stages based upon your risk management either plan, your risk management status. If you're creating different risk management views and handing them up or down to the teams, you need to understand what that impact can be. Also, you have risk categories we're going to talk about. What is a really bad risk versus a really good risk? What's from a bad, if we're looking at the negative risks, what's a 1 versus a 5 or a 10? What does that mean? So you have to define the risk impact. You really need to understand that, and then you need to talk to your customer, your stakeholders, and find out how risk tolerant they are or risk adverse they are. Because sometimes in certain projects, you cannot accept any risk. Others, tremendous leeway. We can handle it. We've got workarounds. We can figure out how that happens. So the first piece of it is to identify the risk. This is the step where you work with your team. You identify what is a positive risk that could be available to you. What are some of the negative risks that could happen to the project? And there's a variety of different methods for that. You can use fishbone diagrams, and once you create a fishbone diagram, it gives you the ability to look at it and say, root cause, this is what could happen. What would be our way to mitigate that or eliminate that? So some of them can be eliminated, some of them can be mitigated, others can be exploited depending on if it's a positive risk. So there's a variety of methods for trying to identify those risks. you would put those into what we refer to as a risk register. All projects should have a risk register associated with it. And that's where you identify not only positive but negative risks, and you create some level of clarity as to what causes them, in addition to how you would react to them, would be the best way to put it. So we've got a PMBOK, or a PM, Book of Knowledge, PMI risk register that we've provided you, and we're going to ask you to go ahead and fill that out. Now the headers on this, if you tag them once you've downloaded this Excel spreadsheet, it will walk you through exactly what we're asking for you. And we're looking for some level of explanation of both the qualitative and the quantitative risk description. In addition to that, how would we respond to it? How would we plan against it? This is where we identify everything that could happen on the project and what our reaction to it would be. Having that reaction already defined from an execution standpoint makes the plan very easy. We know where we need to go next. Now, additionally, you need that qualitative risk analysis, which means you need to actually visually see what's going on. So a risk matrix, and this is a very typical risk matrix tool, gives you the ability to graphically map those same risks that you had on the risk register over into the risk matrix. Here you get to see what's green. So everything that's very low from a likelihood standpoint and very low from an impact standpoint would be things that you don't have to worry about. But if something's red, if something's very high from an impact and very high from a likelihood, that means it's going to happen, and when it does, it's going to shut you down. Those are the areas you need to look at. So when you start creating a risk management plan, you need to remember that as a project manager, you're constantly looking at what are the big risks I've got and what are the impacts. Don't forget also that there's the other side of it, which is what are the positive risks? Because sometimes positive risks have to be acted on at a specific moment. And if you can't do it at that moment, they're gone. It's a one-shot deal. It was available to you. If you could take advantage of it at this point in time, if that point in time slips, you don't get the advantage of doing that. So that was the risk matrix. Now, in addition to that, you can see that there's a variety of techniques that you can do for starting to understand from a quantitative standpoint what the predictive capabilities of something are. We can splinter it off. So there are tool sets out there and software that gives you the ability to start looking at from a basically from a probabilistic perspective, what could happen to us on a project. Start to anticipate that, and what would the impact be, and then being able to almost anticipating that. Many of these are built on expert systems. Many of this is AI kind of integrated into decision making based upon the information you put into it. Now, the one thing I would tell you is this is no smarter than any of the other tools you've got in front of you, because it's garbage in, garbage out. If you don't give it the right information, it's not going to give you the right answer. So the big go away, or the big thing I want you to remember from a risk perspective on a project as a project manager is it is your responsibility to really understand what makes sense. Loading in potential risks that will never happen just because they're catastrophic, I can understand why we would do that. But then trying to react to it and prevent it when you know that there's a 99.99999 chance it's not going to happen may be a waste of time, management resources, and budget. So that's a conversation for other people, not necessarily you. So let's look at positive risks. These are also called opportunities. These are things that come up in front of you, and there are certain windows of time when you can grab them and make them happen for you on your project. So there's 4 different things you can do with a positive risk. You can exploit it. Let's take advantage of it, right? You can accept it. If it happens, we're going to accept it. We're going to share it with other people, or we're going to enhance it. Those are all ways to kind of, I'll say, make a window of advantage associated with it. Now, within acceptance, you have active acceptance and passive acceptance. Active is where we take a proactive method and we go out and we say, let's make sure this happens. How do we make sure this happens? Passive is, it happens to us, it's a great thing, you just keep rolling along. If it happens, that's great. If not, oh well. Those are positive risk responses. So remember, when you're putting that risk register out, you have both negative and positive risks that you have to identify, and there are different techniques for how you handle each one. Now, negative risk responses. Now, we've talked about positives. Let's talk about the negatives. You have avoidance. That means we find a way to avoid this risk. Mitigation means we create something or a plan that if it does happen, it lessens the impact. Transferring it. Many times I can take a risk and I can transfer it to a third party. I can say that I've got a subcontractor, it's their issue, they must deal with it, I don't have to deal with it. Transferring it to another group, another person that owns it, is another way to basically handle that. And then once again, you have active acceptance and passive acceptance. Just as in before with the other ones, what do we do when this happens? In this response, no proactive action will be taken to increase the likelihood of the event in an active way. Instead, the group will formulate a contingency plan. We work on a contingency plan. In a passive one, with passive acceptance, the team does nothing with this risk. The strategy is reserved for the risks which have either no impact or have very little or low chance of occurring. So remember that. There's 5 different ways from a negative risk response that you would fill out into your plan, and there's 4 ways from a positive, okay? And that's how we handle that. Now, how do we control risks? This is probably one of the nuances that drive project managers crazy, is because things happen and we're expected to react to them as quickly as we can. Unless you are monitoring risks, unless you have open communication within your organization where people give you feedback, unless you do audits, reassess, project meetings, workarounds, there's a ton of different things you can do as a project manager to really understand where the big risks are and what's happening with them. That's what you need to do. You need to focus on those areas, not only from a negative perspective, but from a positive perspective. You've got to have both. You've got to be able to exploit the positive risks, and you've got to be able to find a way to mitigate or eliminate the negative risks. That's what makes a great project manager. Now, there's a couple things that can happen that'll help you. Sometimes things happen that we knew there was a possibility of happening. So you have contingency reserves that are set up off to the side. Now, typically you have to go to a board of some sort, you have to explain what happened, and you have to ask for contingency reserves to be added to your budget. They would offset any of the issues associated with a specific risk. These are things that are very, very valuable, but you need to know that they are not it's not the way you want to manage your project off of reserves. You're given a budget. It's expected as a good project manager that you can work within that budget. Or you understand where you're over budget and you've already alerted people that we're going to go over and this is why. And I need contingency reserves or I need management reserve to cover that. Okay? Contingency reserves also are used for unidentified risks. Okay? That means the unknown unknowns. They're not the known knowns, because many times in projects you're going to go in and you're going to say, you know what? These are the areas we're going to struggle in. These are known knowns. I have nothing in there from a reserve standpoint to cover it, but remember that the unknown unknowns is what management reserve is for. That's what covers you when you have unidentified risk associated with a number of different projects and things that happen to you. When it comes to identifying things that you knew were going to be bad, you need to find a way from an opportunity management perspective to what's the best we can do? How can we work around this? What new ideas do we have? How can we create positive risks that can eliminate these or circumvent these? That's what your goal is also as a project manager. You're responsible for bringing this out of the people. You have to talk to the SMEs. You have to talk to everybody on the team. You have to look at the plan and you have to say, what can we do to adapt the plan to where we can make ourselves come in faster, schedule-wise? How can we increase our ability to reduce our, our footprint? How can we reduce budget? What do we need to do? How can we create a different fidelity of quality if necessary that still meets the customer requirements and meets our requirements internally? Those are the challenges you've got. So opportunity management kind of pulls you into, I'll call it 3 different areas. 1, you need to generate ideas. 2, you and everyone on the team, everyone in the organization needs to be versed on looking for opportunities and recognizing opportunities. And the 3rd part would be you need to drive opportunities. You need to be asking everyone at every point in time, what could we do differently that would drive opportunities for us that we don't have in place right now? Those are the skills that make a great project manager. So you need to remember that. Now, types of opportunities that are available for you. You've got scoping choices. Can we change our scope? Is there a way to manipulate the scope in a positive way? Not that we're doing this in a negative way, but is there a way to manage the scope differently? Can we plan our choices differently? And then can we take uncertain events with potential benefits and find a way to capitalize that? Can we work on those? So all 3 of these relate to risk, but sometimes we don't recognize that these are things within the project management envelope, in the environment. These are all things that you need to take advantage of if possible. Now, scope opportunity, many times we look at it and say, we overscoped this. It's always easy to see that we can add things to the scope, but when you start looking at what can we realistically pull away from the scope and still deliver our customer what he expected or she expected at the right time, is a very, very valuable perspective to have. You as a project manager are required to work with your team to try to do that. What scoping choices do we have that will either reduce the value or find a way to reduce risks and the impacts associated with those? Opportunities tend to have a proportional relationship. The greater the opportunity, the greater the risk. So sometimes when you look at opportunities, it's that double-edged sword. We can do this, but if we don't capture it, we are really, really in trouble with something else. So sometimes it doesn't make sense to go capture an opportunity because of the negative, bad things that could happen associated with failing going in that direction. And then we have planning opportunities. Many, many times we look at, initial bottoms-up planning for projects. They're rarely accurate for the expected time, cost, and other objectives. Top-down is very abstract. So you need to find something that adjusts to you. You may find that you have technical people on the team that can give you a much better understanding of what the realistic approach to something should be. If this is a 30-day plan and everybody that's on the team is telling you we have never ever done this in less than 60 days, and if you don't plan on 60 days you're just going to kill yourself, then you need to listen to that. You need to look for planning opportunities. You need to talk to your stakeholders, the people on the team, the SMEs, all of the people around you, and make sure that the plan, remember we're executing it right now, but the plan has smarts to it. It isn't, it isn't a failed plan in the fact that it was artificial to start with. So there's got to be realism associated with it. Now, finally, we've got uncertain event opportunities. Sometimes things happen and you go, whoo-hoo, oh my, look at that, this is good for us, okay? You need to be able to react to that, and you need to be able to take advantage of that. So as a good project manager, you need to be able to be listening to what things are happening around you, in the vapor, in the work environment. You need to be listening, and you need to have people comfortable enough to come to you and say, hey, you know what we could do? And it's when you had that conversation with somebody, you know what we could do, that is an opportunity for you that you would have never understood until it was long gone. So those are the type of conversations you want to have with your team members. Now, in closing, from an executing projects perspective, I have to tell you that executing a project is probably one of the most difficult, followed by closing the project. But closing the project is harder for a different reason. Executing the project takes a longer period of time, typically, and it has all of the people involved. You have multiple people working on multiple things at the same time. So even though you may have a plan and a schedule that shows things happening incrementally as you're moving along, there are multiple disciplines that are happening, and they're all interconnected, which means that if you have an impact on one, it's going to cause something else to happen here. And sometimes you don't recognize that, you don't see that. So the 7 things I want to tell you, my going away for you: clearly define the scope of your project. So when you're working on that WBS section in the scope statement, make sure you really did a great job. Because when you get into this executing stage, if you did a poor job there, it's going to be reflected here. Make sure you select the team members for your team that are appropriate. Sometimes we get names thrown at us, we get people put in front of us and said, here, we want you to use this person. And if it's the wrong fit, or there's something that prevents them from being able to work effectively and efficiently with your team, you need to push back and say, no, I don't want that person. I need somebody else. Give me another representative. Okay? Number 3, outline your goals and keep them smart, specific, measurable, actionable. The resource loaded, realistic, and time phased. They've got to be smart goals. Manage your data. Your data is for you. You may have to give it off to other people. You may have to do earned value reports for other people, but that data is yours. Manage your data. Understand it. Understand where your critical path is. Look at your schedules. What can we do every day to gain one step forward that we didn't think about? Monitor that progress daily. You have to, at certain times, monitor it twice a day. I've seen stand-up meetings we would have at 7 in the morning and another one at 1 in the afternoon because we were working on multiple teams that are working 24 hours a day. So remember, sometimes waiting a day for somebody to tell you what needs to be done when it could happen sooner is not a good thing. Find a way to work that. Foster and develop internal motivation in your team. Something as simple as occasionally bringing in cookies, cupcakes, taking them out for lunch, bringing lunch in, finding a way to reward and recognize your team, to let them know that you recognize how hard they're working and that you respect them, is important and critical for team performance. Your team, if you want to get it into that norming and performing portion and keep it going without being in the storming part, a lot of times something as simple as walking in with a sticky note that says you're doing a great job and putting it on someone's desk and letting them know that you recognize that they're working hard is a great thing from a motivational standpoint. And then the final go away I've got for you: because resources are limited, and they always are on projects, manage your resources wisely and prudently. You really need to understand that there's only a couple things that you have control over. And the things you have control over many times are time, cost, schedule. Those are the 3 parameters that you get to tweak, and you have to use those wisely. So as you're moving through your projects, make sure you remember that. Congratulations on finishing this portion of the execution phase. You're into Module 4. Next, we're going to be doing a couple other things that are going to enhance this, but for right now, have a great week. Goodbye.